Today, for the first time since the U.S. went to war with Iran, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth faced sharp questions from Congress. During the hearing, the Pentagon revealed that the war so far has cost $25 billion. The fighting is on hold, but the military maintains its blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. And PBS NewsHour has learned one of the aircraft carriers currently in the region, the USS Gerald R. Ford, will soon head home after a record-setting 10 months at sea. Nick Schifrin reports on a contentious hearing and a partisan divide over the war.
After 2 months of fighting in the Middle East, the theater of war today was Capitol Hill and a partisan fight over Iran.
Stop.
Based on the intel.
Stop. Reclaiming my time.
Because you yell doesn't make you right.
Hey guys, Dr. John is here, so this has just happened. Pete Hegseth's congressional hearing was a disaster. He flailed, yelled, and dodged questions throughout, coming across not as a confident defense secretary, but as a cornered man with no answers, while lawmakers methodically exposed the chaos he's brought to the Pentagon. The first devastating exchange came when Democratic Congressman Carbajal took the microphone and systematically walked Hegseth through a cross-examination that laid bare just how far out of his depth the secretary truly is.
Mr. Hegseth, I stand by what I said last time you were here. You were incompetent then, you're incompetent now, and you're the gift that keeps on giving when it comes to incompetence. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, not
Other than that, I'm doing great.
Gentleman
Thank you.
There was no gentle warm-up, no softball question to ease into the proceedings. Carbajal went straight for the jugular, forcing Hegseth to confront the gaping chasm between the administration's triumphant rhetoric and the bloody, chaotic reality on the ground in Iran. The defense secretary, who had spent weeks painting a picture of swift and decisive victory, suddenly found himself unable to explain basic facts about the conflict he was supposed to be managing. The confidence that usually drips from his public statements evaporated, replaced by a defensive, almost frantic energy that would become the defining theme of the entire day. Then Congresswoman Houlihan stepped up and things got even worse.
So I will move on, sir, and I'm going to reclaim my time. General George, let's talk about a guy who's a patriot, somebody who every single person here in this dais and down there in that audience and out there in this world has huge admiration for. Why did he get fired?
Well, as with any moves we make with general officers, first of all, I thank them for their service. And ultimately,
my impression is you thanked him by a text or a phone call. You didn't even do it to his face.
Out of respect for these officers, we never talk about the nature of their removal, but every one of them, including myself, knows that they serve at the pleasure of the president. Ultimately, out of respect to these officers, we don't reveal it. However, I will note, it's very difficult to change the culture of a department that was been destroyed by the wrong perspectives.
So you think General George destroyed a culture?
There are many, we've gotten rid of many general officers in this administration because we need new leadership.
Sir. You have no way of explaining why you fired one of the most decorated and remarkable men who's
we
ever
needed
served
new
the
leadership.
station.
That's
and
my
so
answer.
your answer is a very immature way of responding to my request.
Her line of questioning was brutally simple, the kind of question that any competent defense secretary should be able to answer without hesitation. The war in Iran, she pointed out, has been raging for 60 days. The administration has repeatedly signaled that major operations are winding down, that the mission is essentially accomplished, that the forces of freedom have once again triumphed. And yet, she observed, it is abundantly clear that the conflict is nowhere near finished. American troops remain in harm's way. The enemy has not surrendered. The objectives that supposedly justified this catastrophic adventure remain unmet. So her question was direct and unavoidable. How many more months would be required to conclude operations successfully? And how many more billions of dollars would the Pentagon be asking Congress to extract from the American taxpayer to fund this endless quagmire?
Despite the fact that your recent comments indicate that operations appear to be finished, it's clear there clearly is more work that needs to be done. As mentioned, today is indeed 60 days. So, Mr. Secretary, how many more months, just order of magnitude, do you think that you're going to need to be able to conclude operations successfully? And how many more billions of dollars do you think you're going to ask this body for?
Well, as you know, and as the president has stated, you would never tell your adversary,
Sir, I
especially once
recognize
you've,
that is the line that you always,
especially once
but
you've
give me an order of
decimated their
magnitude.
military and you control their
3x,
strait,
4x?
how long you would be committed to the mission.
What came next was not an answer. It was a masterclass in evasion. Hegseth leaned into the same tired deflection that every failing military leader reaches for when they cannot justify their failure. He insisted that revealing a timeline would be irresponsible, that the enemy was listening, that operational security demanded silence. But Houlihan had heard that line before, had heard it repeated in every hearing where officials wanted to avoid admitting that they had no plan, no exit strategy, no coherent vision for what victory even meant. She pressed harder, and Hegseth's voice rose in volume as his answers grew thinner in substance. The disconnect between the administration's victory lap rhetoric and the secretary's inability to articulate a path to actual victory was so glaring that it seemed to hang in the air like smoke after a fire. Congressman Vindman, a veteran who understands warfare at a visceral level that Hegseth can only pretend to, took his turn and delivered a blow that cut straight to the heart of the administration's legitimacy.
For President Trump, overwhelmingly, they voted for that
I got
position.
that, but the president ordered the strike. Is that correct?
Which strike are you referring to?
The strike on Iran, the war that we're in.
Oh, of course. I mean,
okay.
he's the commander in
So
chief. He's made the calls.
It sounds like you're blaming daddy for the mess we're in, and I don't think he's going to be particularly happy with you.
I see what you're trying to do. There's no daylight in this administration on this
Secretary, I'm
campaign,
asking
and I'm happy
questions. You've been
to
admonished
stand
for
shoulder to
this
shoulder
before.
with this
You're
administration.
reclaiming my time.
He reminded Hegseth of the secretary's own opening statement, in which Hegseth had claimed that the American people voted for this war, that the public had somehow endorsed the chaos and death and destruction that has followed. Vindman asked, with the kind of quiet intensity that is far more devastating than shouting, whether Hegseth truly believed that the voters who went to the polls understood they were casting ballots for a catastrophic military adventure in the Middle East.
Close. And so I just want to kind of give you the state of play right now. It's been 2 months of war. We have hopes for a resolution, but the war continues, really. Iran has closed the strait, and we've now gone in and blockaded their ports. 1/5 of the world's oil is unable to transit the strait, and the American people and the department are paying significantly more. And you also said that this is what the American people actually voted for. But actually, the American people voted for a promise not to get into Middle Eastern wars. And they voted for lower prices. And this is the exact opposite of what they got. So let me ask you this. The president ordered the strike. Is that correct?
The president's been saying for over 30 years that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. So he's been very clear as a position. When the American people voted for President Trump overwhelmingly, they voted for that position.
That, but the president ordered the strike. Is that correct?
The question hung there, unanswered in any meaningful way, because the truth is that no one voted for this. No one asked for 6 dead soldiers and hundreds wounded. No one requested a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz that would send the global economy into a tailspin. The American people voted for a lot of things, but they did not vote to be led into a disaster by a Secretary of Defense who cannot explain what he is doing or why. Congresswoman Goodlander then took the proceedings into even more treacherous territory. Her question was a matter of fundamental American legal principle, the kind of thing that every service member learns in basic training and every civilian leader should have internalized long before they ever set foot in the Pentagon. She asked Hegseth whether he agreed with the statement that the military should not follow unlawful orders. This is not a trick question. This is not a partisan trap. This is the bedrock of the American military tradition, the principle that separates a professional armed force from a band of thugs. A soldier follows lawful orders. A soldier does not follow unlawful orders. That is the oath. That is the law. That is the covenant between those who serve and the nation they protect. Hegseth's response was revealing in ways he almost certainly did not intend. He agreed with the statement because what else could he do? But then he immediately accused Goodlander of making a partisan point, of insinuating something dark about the commander-in-chief. She was not insinuating. She was quoting Hegseth himself from a statement he had made years earlier, and she was asking him to affirm on the record in front of Congress and the American people that the principle still applied. Hegseth squirmed. He deflected. He tried to paint a simple question about the rule of law as a political attack. The moment was clarifying. A Secretary of Defense who cannot comfortably and unequivocally affirm that the military must refuse unlawful orders is a Secretary of Defense who is either confused about the law or afraid of what his boss might think about the law. Neither possibility is reassuring. Congressman Moulton, a Marine Corps veteran who has seen actual combat, took the microphone and things escalated dramatically. He raised a statement that Hegseth had made at a press conference, a statement that had alarmed legal experts and military professionals when it was first uttered and that had only grown more disturbing with time. Hegseth had said that the United States would give the enemy no quarter and no mercy. The phrase "no quarter" is not just a colorful expression of toughness. It is a specific term with a specific meaning under the laws of armed conflict. Giving no quarter means refusing to accept surrender. It means killing enemy combatants who are trying to lay down their arms. It is, unequivocally and without exception, a war crime. The Geneva Conventions are crystal clear on this point. Moulton asked Hegseth directly and repeatedly whether he stood by that statement, whether he understood that he had essentially advocated for murder, whether he was prepared to explain to the families of American service members that their loved ones were being ordered to commit atrocities. Hegseth's response was a jumble of empty slogans about fighting to win and giving troops the tools they need. He would not answer the question. He could not answer the question because answering honestly would mean admitting that he had advocated for a war crime, and walking it back would mean admitting that he did not know what he was talking about when he said it. Moulton pressed harder, forcing Hegseth to confront the horrific implications of his own words, and Hegseth simply crumbled, retreating into evasion and bluster. A man who had been so eager to call Democratic members of Congress seditious for reminding troops to follow the law now found himself unable to explain why he had told those same troops to commit murder. Congressman DeLucio, another veteran, picked up the same thread and pulled it even tighter. He asked Hegseth, as plainly as language allows, what a soldier should do when an enemy combatant surrenders. Should that soldier accept the surrender as the law requires, or should the soldier provide no quarter and kill the prisoner? Hegseth danced around the question like a man walking through a minefield blindfolded. He talked about rules of engagement and giving commanders flexibility. He would not say the simple, obvious words that every American service member knows by heart. You accept surrender. You do not kill prisoners. You follow the law of war. The fact that the Secretary of Defense could not bring himself to say these words in public under oath before the House Armed Services Committee is a disgrace that will linger long after this hearing fades from the news cycle. Congressman Ryan then delivered perhaps the most emotionally devastating sequence of the entire hearing. He read aloud from the accounts of survivors of an attack on American positions, an attack that killed 6 American soldiers. These soldiers, according to the testimony that has emerged, were stationed at a base that had virtually no meaningful defenses, no counter-drone systems, no counter-rocket artillery, no counter-mortar capabilities, not even the basic overhead protection that Ryan and Hegseth both had when they served in Iraq decades earlier. The survivors had described the base's defensive posture as essentially non-existent. They said they were unprepared to provide any defense for themselves. They said the position was not fortified. And they said that Hegseth, standing at the Pentagon podium the day after the attack, had lied to the American people about what happened. Hegseth had called the deadly strike a squirter that somehow squeaked through fortified defenses. The survivors, the men who watched their comrades die because those defenses did not exist, called that characterization a falsehood. Ryan read their words into the record, his voice tight with barely contained fury. He asked Hegseth whether he was calling these soldiers, these American heroes who survived a massacre, liars, and Hegseth exploded. He shouted over Ryan, his voice cracking with indignation, accusing the congressman of playing games, of monologuing falsehoods, of failing to see the larger strategic picture. Ryan stopped him cold. Just because you yell does not make you right. The line landed like a thunderclap. Hegseth kept shouting, trying to reclaim the momentum, but Ryan would not yield. He told Hegseth that the soldiers who survived that attack, the ones who came forward to tell the truth about what happened, were braver than the Secretary of Defense, and he repeated the demand that has been echoing through the Capitol for months: resign. Secretary Hegseth, those soldiers told the truth. Those soldiers are braver than you are. They are asking for accountability. They deserve accountability. And I am asking for the same, starting with you. You need to resign immediately. Congressman DeLuzio returned to this theme, quoting directly from the survivors' accounts that had been reported by CBS. The soldiers had said they were moved closer to Iran, to a deeply unsafe area that was a known target. They had said the unit was unprepared to provide any defense for itself. Hegseth's own spokesperson, Sean Parnell, had responded to this reporting by calling it untrue, effectively branding the survivors as fabricators. DeLuzio asked Hegseth whether he agreed with his spokesperson. Was he calling these soldiers liars? Hegseth erupted again, accusing DeLuzio of disparaging him, of suggesting he did not care about the troops. Nobody cares more about the fate of our troops, he insisted, his voice rising to a near scream. DeLuzio calmly noted that asking a simple question was not disparaging anyone, and Hegseth's inability to answer that simple question spoke volumes. The chairman had to intervene to restore order, reminding everyone that the congressman controlled the time and the secretary needed to answer the question. Hegseth never did. Congressman Smith, the ranking member of the committee, then extracted a piece of information that the Pentagon had been withholding for weeks. The cost of the war in Iran, the price tag that American taxpayers are being forced to pay for this catastrophic adventure, has reached approximately $25 billion. Smith had been asking for this number for what he described as a hell of a long time, and the Pentagon had consistently stonewalled. Now, under oath and under pressure, Hegseth finally admitted it. $25 billion, and that number is almost certainly an underestimate. It covers munitions expended, operations and maintenance, and equipment replacement, but it does not capture the full economic toll, the destroyed aircraft, the lost lives, the long-term costs of caring for wounded veterans, the economic disruption caused by the closure of critical shipping lanes. The admission was a bombshell, and it opened the door to an even more devastating line of questioning. Smith then pivoted to the fundamental justification for the war. The administration had insisted that Iran's nuclear program posed an imminent threat, that the strikes were necessary to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran, that there was simply no time to wait. Hegseth had claimed earlier in the hearing that Iran's nuclear facilities were obliterated, completely destroyed, reduced to rubble. But if that were true, Smith pointed out, then the imminent threat had been neutralized. So why was the war continuing? Why were American troops still dying? Why was the Strait of Hormuz still blockaded? Hegseth tried to pivot, claiming that Iran still had nuclear ambitions, that their conventional missile shield needed to be dismantled, that the threat was ongoing. Smith would not let him escape so easily. He noted that the strategy Hegseth was describing sounded an awful lot like the North Korea strategy, a strategy that had allowed Pyongyang to slow walk its way to a nuclear arsenal while hiding behind conventional capabilities. That strategy had failed spectacularly. North Korea now boasts of producing nuclear warheads at an alarming rate, building what may soon be one of the largest nuclear arsenals on the planet. And the man who negotiated that failed strategy, who exchanged love letters with Kim Jong-un and accomplished nothing, was the same man now insisting that the Iran war was a brilliant success. Congresswoman Jacobs took the microphone and delivered a summation so devastating that it seemed to physically deflate Hegseth. She noted that 13 American troops were dead, more than 380 were wounded. The Strait of Hormuz was closed despite a supposed ceasefire. Iranian leadership was still in power. Nuclear material was still unaccounted for, and the war was costing billions with no end in sight. She looked at Hegseth and said that if he genuinely believed this was what winning looked like, then perhaps the committee should be questioning his mental stability. Perhaps, she suggested, the president should think about replacing him. The silence that followed was deafening. Congressman Khanna pressed Hegseth on the economic cost of the war to ordinary Americans. He asked about the price of gas, the price of food, the $5,000 per year, that experts estimate this conflict is costing every American household. Hegseth dismissed the question as a gotcha, as if asking how much a war costs was some kind of cheap rhetorical trick. Khanna's response was blistering. He told Hegseth to go ask the Americans who cannot afford gas, who cannot afford groceries, whose homes are about to be foreclosed, who may be facing eviction, whether they think the cost of this war is a gotcha question. Hegseth had no response. He simply did not know the answer, had not done the analysis, had not bothered to calculate what his war was costing the people he is supposed to serve. The questioning about the removal of General Randy George was another unmitigated disaster. Congresswoman Strickland asked why the beloved four-star Army Chief of Staff had been fired in the middle of an active conflict. General George had served for 4 decades, had commanded at every level, was widely respected across the force. His removal during wartime, when leadership continuity is most critical, demanded an explanation. Strickland asked whether George was removed because he presented a national security risk, a mission risk, or a leadership concern. Or was he removed because he challenged some of the decisions being made at the political level? Hegseth refused to answer, hiding behind a policy of not discussing personnel matters. Strickland pressed. Hegseth tried to flip the question, asking her where General George fell in the operational chain of command. It was a transparent attempt to change the subject, and Strickland was not having it. She reclaimed her time, leaving Hegseth exposed, unable to justify a major personnel decision made at the worst possible moment. Congresswoman Jacobs asked about the president's increasingly unhinged social media posts, the ones that have alarmed even prominent conservative voices. Marjorie Taylor Greene had called the president out of control. Candace Owens had suggested the 25th Amendment. Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, Stephanie Grisham, the list of concerned voices spanned the political spectrum. Jacobs wanted to know how Hegseth explained to his troops that their commander-in-chief was posting manifestly unstable content while they were in harm's way. Hegseth's response was to invoke Joe Biden, a man who is no longer president, a man whose alleged failings do absolutely nothing to answer the question about the current commander-in-chief's fitness for office. Jacobs did not let him escape. She asked about a specific post that many Christians found deeply offensive. Hegseth said he was not there to explain posts. He was there for a budget hearing. Jacobs reminded him that the mental stability of the commander-in-chief is deeply important to the troops and to the country, and that when Democrats had concerns about their own nominee's fitness, they took action. She encouraged Republicans to find the same courage. The final devastating sequence came when Congresswoman Strickland returned to questioning about the Kid Rock helicopter scandal. An investigation had been launched by the 101st Combat Aviation Brigade into the use of Apache helicopters to ferry a celebrity musician around on what appeared to be joyrides. Before the investigation could be completed, Hegseth personally terminated it via social media post. Strickland asked whether the president had been consulted before that decision. Hegseth's refusal to answer made it clear that the president had indeed been involved, meaning the commander-in-chief himself had overruled the leadership of the storied 101st Airborne to protect a political ally from accountability. The implications of that revelation are staggering. A chain of command corrupted from the very top, and a Secretary of Defense who could not summon the courage to defend the principle of accountability under oath. By the time the hearing concluded, the picture was complete. The defense secretary had been exposed as a man who cannot answer basic questions about the war he is managing, who cannot articulate a strategy for victory or even a definition of what victory means, who advocates for war crimes and then refuses to clarify whether he meant it, who lies to the American people about the circumstances of their sons and daughters dying in combat, who fires respected military leaders without explanation during wartime, who personally terminates investigations to protect favored insiders, and who responds to legitimate oversight with shouting, deflection, and empty slogans. This is not leadership. This is not competence. This is a man cracking under the weight of a job he was never remotely qualified to hold. And the cracks are spreading faster than anyone can patch them.